Someone who wanted to erase me cleanly. A small pulse of panic flickered beneath my ribs. I pushed it down, swallowed hard, and forced myself to breathe. Don't jump to conclusions, Elena. You don't know anything yet. Just go inside. Ask. Stay calm. The walk back to the house felt longer than usual, like the air itself had thickened around me. The porch light flickered, a soft yellow glow that should have felt comforting, but instead looked like a warning. When I stepped into the kitchen, everything was normal. Too normal. Mom was chopping vegetables. Dad was scrolling on his phone. Marissa was at the table, surrounded by notes and textbooks, her hair in a perfect messy bun that somehow made her look even more put together. I stood there waiting, hoping someone would look up, see my face, sense something was wrong. No one did. "Hey," I said quietly. My voice cracked. "Mom?" She didn't glance up. "Honey, not now. Your sister has her final exam tomorrow. Let's keep things peaceful tonight, okay?" Peaceful? My workshop had been gutted, and she wanted peace. I tried again. "Dad, did you move anything from the shed?" Dad didn't even lift his eyes. "Shed?" "My workshop," I said. "All my things are gone." And then, finally, Marissa looked up, slowly, like she already knew what I was talking about. There was something unsettling in her expression, not surprise, not confusion, recognition. It hit me like a soft shove in the dark. They knew something. Dad exhaled sharply, the way he always did when a conversation was about to inconvenience him. "Elena, honey, don't start. We've had a long day." "My workshop is empty," I repeated. "Everything is gone, and someone did it on purpose. Who touched my stuff?" Mom's chopping slowed. Dad put down his phone. Marissa closed her textbook. The silence was no longer peaceful. It was loaded, like the room was holding its breath, and in that heavy pause, something inside me shifted. A boundary, a belief, a trust I didn't even know I still held. "Why aren't any of you surprised?" I asked quietly. Mom finally looked up, and the guilt in her eyes was unmistakable. "Elena, sweetie, your father will explain." Dad cleared his throat and folded his hands like he was preparing for a business meeting, not a confession. "It's simple," he said. "We needed money. Marissa's exam fees, her review courses, the hotel for her clinical rotation. These things aren't cheap. We had to make a practical decision." My ears rang. "What decision?" Dad blinked once, slowly. "We sold your equipment." There was the explosion. Not loud, not violent, just devastating. A quiet, clean shatter straight through the center of me. I felt the world tilt, everything going slightly off balance, like a movie frame losing focus. My voice came out thin. "You sold everything?" Mom winced. Dad held firm. Marissa didn't say a word, and the workshop's perfect emptiness suddenly made sense. This wasn't theft. This wasn't an accident. This was betrayal, planned, approved, executed by the people I lived with, the people I trusted, the people who were supposed to protect me. For a few seconds after Dad said the words, "We sold your equipment," I couldn't hear anything. It felt like someone had pressed two palms over my ears, muffling the world until all that existed was the echo of that sentence looping in my skull. My body went still in that instinctive animal way, like when you're trying to figure out if the thing that hurt you is finished or winding up for another blow. I opened my mouth, but nothing came out at first. It was like shock had stolen my breath and locked it somewhere behind my ribs. Dad continued talking, completely misreading my silence as understanding. "It was the logical choice, Elena," he said, his voice maddeningly even. "Your tools were valuable, just sitting there. Meanwhile, your sister—" "My sister," I whispered, finding my voice at last, though it sounded like it belonged to someone else. "So you took everything I own because Marissa needed money?" Dad flinched. Not much, just a tiny twitch, but it was enough to tell me he knew how terrible it sounded. Mom jumped in with the soft, pleading tone she always used whenever she sensed Dad losing control of the narrative. "Sweetheart, listen. You know how hard things have been. Your father and I, we're drowning in bills, and your sister is so close to becoming something. This exam, this certification, it's her future. Her future. Her future. Her future." The phrase slammed into me like a heartbeat I didn't want, rhythmic and cruel. "What about my future?" I asked. Mom blinked, startled. "Honey, you can always rebuild. You're talented. You'll get new tools eventually. But Marissa is more important?" The words shot out before I could stop them. "Is that what you're trying to say? That Marissa is the one worth investing in, and I'm just, what, a savings account with a pulse?" "Elena, don't be dramatic," Dad snapped, his voice rising. "This is exactly why we didn't discuss it with you. You get emotional. You don't see the practical side of things." Practical, that word again, the dagger he always carved into me. I took a step back, my pulse hammering. Practical is selling a bike. Practical is pawning a TV. Practical is not. My voice cracked. "It is not selling the only thing I've built with my own hands." Dad stood up, jaw tight. "You live in our home. We do what we have to do to keep this family functioning. Marissa's career will help all of us someday. Your woodworking," he said the word with a dismissive flick of his fingers, "won't." My throat tightened. "You know it's not woodworking. You know I've been training for lutherie for years." Dad's eyes hardened. "It's a hobby, Elena, not a real career. You work at a music shop and a diner. You're 21. You don't know what the world requires yet." Something inside me went sharp and dangerous. I'd spent years swallowing that tone, the condescension he wrapped like barbed wire around every sentence, the assumption that I was small, unformed, directionless, a burden, disposable when necessary. But in that moment, seeing the blank space where my workshop used to be, hearing the steady, cold justification in his voice, I felt something shift, like the beam in a house finally snapping after years of pressure. Marissa finally spoke, her voice quiet. "Elena, I didn't know they were going to sell everything. I swear I didn't. I just told them how worried I was about my exam and they offered to sell my life to make you feel better?" I cut in. "That's not something you should have accepted quietly." She looked down at her textbook, and a hot pulse of betrayal surged through me. She hadn't fought for me. She hadn't even asked. She'd let it happen. Dad rubbed his forehead. "We are not doing this tonight. We're all exhausted. We'll talk in the morning." "No," I said. The word came out steady, almost eerily calm. "We're talking now." Mom stepped toward me, lowering her voice the way she always did when she was about to guilt trip me. "Elena, please. You know your sister's future depends on this. You're young. You'll recover. Don't make this harder than it has to be." I almost laughed. "Recover? From having your entire livelihood sold behind your back? From realizing that in your own home you are the lowest priority, even to the people who raised you?" My hands began to shake. My heart was pounding so loudly it felt like someone was knocking inside my chest. I looked at each of them, Dad, unyielding and blind to everything but his own logic. Mom, the eternal peacemaker who kept the peace by sacrificing me. Marissa, the golden child who didn't even notice the shadows she cast. Something in me broke. Or maybe it finally healed. "Tell me exactly what you sold," I said quietly. Dad sighed like the victim in the conversation. "Everything. The machines, the wood, the tools. There was no point keeping pieces. A collector offered a good price. We needed it." "How much?" "That isn't your concern," he said. "That was my property," I replied. "So yes, it is my concern." Dad's eyes narrowed. "You live under my roof. That makes it family property. You're not independent. Until you are, your things are under my authority." Authority. That word felt like a slap. I'd spent years obeying, shrinking, adjusting, reworking myself into quieter and smaller shapes to avoid conflict. but suddenly I felt impossibly large, like I was seeing everything clearly for the first time. I realized something I should have known long ago. I was never going to be treated as an equal in this house. Not while Dad saw my dreams as a hobby. Not while Mom begged for peace that required my silence. Not while Marissa existed at the center and I barely existed at the edges. I felt my voice steady, almost too steady. "You didn't just sell my tools," I said. "You sold every ounce of trust I had left." Dad opened his mouth, but the door between us had already closed. Not physically, emotionally, spiritually. A line had been drawn, and I knew I wasn't stepping back over it. Not ever again. I don't remember walking up the stairs or how my bedroom door ended up closing behind me. All I know is that the moment the latch clicked, the weight of everything hit me like a collapsing roof. I felt the shock first, the hollow, icy kind that makes your limbs go numb, then the heat, rising fast and wild under my skin. My room looked exactly the same as it had that morning, small, cluttered, smelling faintly of coffee from the mug I forgot to rinse, but now it felt hostile. Like the walls knew what the people downstairs had done and silently agreed with them. I sank onto my bed, hands shaking as I tried to make sense of the betrayal. People talk about heartbreak like it's romantic, shattered expectations, unrequited love. But this was a different kind of heartbreak. This was realizing the people who raised you would burn your dreams alive just to keep someone else warm. On the night I turned 21, I opened my workshop door and stopped breathing. The room wasn't messy, wasn't ransacked. It was empty. My tools, my wood, my workbench, all disappeared with a kind of careful, intentional order that made my skin crawl. And the worst part? Only someone who knew me could have done it. Before I go further, if you enjoy real stories like this, feel free to subscribe. It truly helps me keep sharing them. My name is Elena Hart, and before that night, my life in Ridgefield, Montana was small, predictable, and easy to overlook. I worked morning shifts at a local guitar shop, evening shifts at a diner off Highway 92, and spent whatever time I had left inside this shed-turned workshop, my sanctuary, my escape, my future. I'd rebuilt the place from nothing, scrubbed out the oil stains, rewired the lighting from YouTube tutorials, saved every paycheck to buy each chisel, each clamp, each slab of spruce and walnut. Inside that workshop, I finally felt like I mattered. Earlier that day, nothing seemed out of the ordinary. Mom was pacing the kitchen, reminding me not to stress my older sister, Marissa, who had an important nursing exam coming up. Dad was hunched over a pile of bills again, pretending he wasn't drowning. And me? I slipped out the door unnoticed, same as every birthday. Marissa was the shining one, the investment, the kid whose future shaped the entire household. I was the one who filled extra shifts and stayed quiet so things wouldn't get harder than they already were. But that night, when I stepped into my workshop, expecting the warm scent of wood and varnish, everything inside me went cold. My hand carving set, gone. The humidity-controlled rack I'd built last winter, gone. The tone wood I'd spent 3 years collecting, gone. Even my grandmother's tiny micro-chisels, the only heirloom I'd ever been given, had vanished. The shed didn't look robbed. It looked emptied with intention. Someone didn't just take my tools. They took their time. They knew exactly what to remove, what to leave, how not to make a mess. This wasn't a stranger. This wasn't random. Someone in my own house had walked into the one place that made me feel alive and erased me from it. For a long moment, I just stood in the doorway of that empty workshop, my hand still wrapped around the doorknob as if letting go would make everything collapse. The fluorescent light above me buzzed, a harsh, unkind sound that filled the silence where my life used to be. I felt something strange inside my chest, like grief trying to outrun shock. At first, I tried to tell myself there had to be a harmless explanation. Maybe Dad moved things around. Maybe Mom hired someone to help me organize without telling me. Maybe. But the longer I stared, the more the truth formed a hard, cold knot in my stomach. This wasn't cleaning. This wasn't rearranging. This was extraction. I stepped into the room slowly, almost afraid the floor might give way. My boots echoed against the bare planks, an unnatural sound in a place that used to be warm with clutter and life. I knelt where my workbench had been, touching the faint outline of sawdust still clinging to the floorboards. My fingertips came up dry. Whoever took everything had even swept. Who does that? Not a thief? Not a stranger. My phone buzzed. Marissa. I stared at the screen as her messages rolled in, one after another. Elena, please come downstairs. We didn't mean to hurt you. Can you just be reasonable for once? Reasonable. That word tasted like iron. I tossed the phone aside and stood up abruptly, pacing the room. My thoughts were running too fast, colliding into each other. I kept seeing flashes. The empty workshop, Dad's calm explanation, Mom's pleading eyes, Marissa's guilt that felt more like annoyance. Each image sharpened the anger inside me. And then, under all that fury, something else surfaced. A realization. Quiet but sharp. They didn't think I would fight back. They didn't think I could fight back. In their minds, I was the daughter who swallowed things, who let life roll over her, who understood the family's struggles. They were so confident in that version of me that they didn't even bother hiding what they did. That thought steadied me. Slowly, deliberately, I pulled my duffel bag from under the bed. The zipper's sound cut through the room like a clean slice. I didn't know exactly what I was doing yet, but I knew one thing. I wasn't staying in this house another night. As I folded my clothes, my breathing began to settle, not because I was calm, but because something inside me was sharpening. Strength, maybe, or clarity, or the kind of anger that stops shaking and starts thinking. My eyes drifted to the corner of my room, to the small metal box where I kept my most important documents: birth certificate, passport, a few certificates from Lutherie workshops I'd saved 6 months to attend. Proof that my life existed outside these walls. I packed it gently, almost reverently. By the time I finished, the duffel bag sat heavy on the bed, heavy with everything I owned that they hadn't managed to sell. A knock broke the silence. "Elena?" Mom's voice, soft, trembling. "Honey, please open the door. Your father is upset. Your sister is upset. You're upsetting everyone." I closed my eyes because of course that was her angle, everyone else's feelings. "I'm packing," I said, not raising my voice, not apologizing. There was a stunned pause. "Packing? For what?" "To leave," I answered. Mom gasped like I'd said something obscene. "Elena, don't be ridiculous. You have nowhere to go. You're overreacting." "Mom," I said quietly, "stop telling me how I should feel about something you did to me." The hallway went silent. Then her voice came back, small, pleading. "We're your family. Families don't sell their children's futures behind their backs." A soft sob escaped her, but for the first time in my life, it didn't pull me toward her. It pushed me further away. When her footsteps finally moved down the hall, I exhaled, my chest tight but certain. That's when another thought sparked, the one that would change everything. They sold my tools because they thought that's all I had. They thought the workshop was my dream. They forgot why I built it. I didn't stay up nights sanding wood and tuning braces because I liked tools. I stayed up because I believed in my hands. They didn't sell that. And as that truth settled over me, warm and fierce, I realized something else. They had taken everything they could touch. They couldn't steal what was coming next. I zipped the duffel bag, and for the first time in years, I felt the ground under me shift in the right direction. I slipped out the back door with my duffel bag slung over my shoulder, the cool Montana night wrapping around me like a truth I'd been avoiding for years. The house behind me was dim, quiet, pretending to sleep, just like it always had when it came to my dreams. But for the first time, I didn't feel guilty walking away from it. I felt released, like I'd finally stopped holding my breath. The gravel crunched under my boots as I crossed the yard, my eyes drifting toward the workshop, its hollow silhouette stark against the moonlight. It should have broken me to look at it, but instead, something almost electric buzzed through my chest. They had wiped it clean, yes, erased every visible piece of me. But the emptiness made one thing clear. If the workshop could be built once, I could build again. Somewhere else. Somewhere they didn't get a vote. I stepped onto the street and pulled out my phone. My fingers hesitated for a moment before dialing a number I hadn't used in months. Jonah, my mentor, and the only person who ever saw potential where others saw a hobby. He answered on the second ring, his voice groggy. "Elena? You okay?" The question cracked something open inside me. Not tears, just truth. "No," I said, steady, "but I'm leaving home, and I need a place to land, just for tonight." There was no silence on his end, no hesitation, no judgment. "Come over," he said. "Now." The shop doors unlocked. My chest loosened. It felt like someone finally turned a light on inside me. The walk to Jonah's wasn't long, but every minute of it felt symbolic, like each step peeled off another layer of the girl who stayed quiet, who made herself small, who let other people decide her worth. By the time his place came into view, warm light spilling from the windows, I felt taller than I had in years. Jonah opened the door before I could knock. One look at my face and he stepped aside without asking questions. The workshop behind him smelled like cedar and polish, comforting in a way that made my throat tighten. "Tell me what happened," he said gently. So I did. The words poured out of me, calmer than I expected, more precise than I felt. The empty workshop, my father's cold logic, my mother's excuses, my sister's silence. Jonah didn't interrupt once. He just listened, jaw tightening, eyes darkening with a quiet fury. When I finished, he leaned back against the work table, arms crossed. "They didn't just take your tools," he said. "They took your foundation. And people only do that when they're terrified of what you're capable of." The truth of it hit me like a flash of heat. Terrified, not of who I was, but who I could become without them. Jonah nodded toward the open space beside his bench. "You can stay here as long as you need. Use the tools, build again, start from scratch if you have to. Just promise me one thing." "What?" I asked. "Don't go back there expecting them to change." I breathed out slowly. "I won't." For the first time that night, I meant it. And standing there, surrounded by the hum of machines, the scent of wood, the faint heartbeat of a place built on creation instead of sacrifice, I felt something powerful rising in me. Not anger, not grief, something stronger. Resolve. In the weeks that followed, I rebuilt my life in the quiet glow of Jonah's workshop. Not all at once, not in some cinematic burst of triumph, but slowly, the way healing always begins, with small choices made in the dark. For the first time, I wasn't shaping wood to escape something. I was shaping it to become someone. Every curve I carved, every brace I sanded, every note that rang out from the pieces I rebuilt reminded me of one truth I had spent years ignoring. What other people take from you can wound you deeply, but what they cannot take, your hands, your vision, your fire, that's where your future lives. My family didn't magically fix themselves. They didn't suddenly understand the damage they'd done, and maybe they never will. But I learned that closure doesn't always require repair. Sometimes closure is simply choosing to walk forward without waiting for someone to follow. If this story stayed with you, I want to leave you with the line that changed me. The day they took everything from me was the day I finally realized I didn't need their permission to begin. Thank you for spending this time with me. Truly. If stories like this resonate, if you've ever had to rebuild after someone underestimated you, I'd be honored if you'd subscribe so we can keep growing together. Your support helps more than you know. And if you're still here, still watching, still feeling something from this journey, then stay with me a little longer. There's another chapter ahead, one that digs deeper, hits harder, and shows what rise really looks like. I hope I'll see you in the next video.